G'day guys. This is looking at the effects of oxalate on bone tissue in particular. So we'll just go and look at this study for first. We'll start off with this one. Okay, so they're looking at crystal deposits in the human intervertebral disc, implications for disc degeneration. So let's just look at the abstract, background contents. All through crystal deposition in cartilage and synovial fluids has received much attention. Crystal formations and the role that crystal deposits play are virtually unexplored in the invertebral disc. In articular cartilage matrix, crystal deposits are associated with altered extracellular matrix and cell phenotype features, but crystal deposition in the human invertebrate has received much less attention. That's true. I mean, you know, we've seen like joints and stuff like that, where we've looked at arthritics and related issues in terms of oxalate crystals and stuff like that. What they're looking at is looking at some of these other issues in some other areas. Purpose: to identify the incidence of crystal deposition in the annals and to evaluate associated disc cells and ECM features, the extracellular matrix. Okay, study design settings, human intervertebral discs. Nell's tissue was obtained in a prospective study of the presence of crystals in the disc ECM. Human subjects, Institutional Review Board approved experimental studies. Did pass the ethical review. Patient samples, 200 ETC sequential disc specimens were submitted for surgical disc procedures performed on individuals with herniated discs, degenerative disc disease, or recurrent disc herniation. During the same period, 3 disc specimens were received from non-surgical donors and added to the study population. Outcomes: histological features with specific attention to crystal depositions. Methods: specimens were processed decalcified and examined for the histological presence of crystal features around crystals. So basically they decomposed the specimen to look, is there crystals in these things or not? The proportion of specimen containing crystals were determined to be 40.7% crystals, displaying varying size, morphology, polarization, light, birefringence features. Pyrophosphate crystals were most common, but oxalate-like crystals were also present. ECM in crystal regions showed previous recognized alterations. Conclusions: this study shows that incidence of crystal deposition in discs is approximately 15% and is thus a relatively common occurrence. These data are important because masses of crystals not only disrupt disc ECM, but also, that's the extracellular matrix, okay? But also, which is the sort of collagenous sort of, well, all bone is sort of collagenous with mineralization. So that's what they're talking about, that tissue, and they're finding crystals, quite a few of these oxalate crystals. So they're embedding in. So before we sort of had information about joints, but here they're actually finding them in discs. So very interesting, but may also accelerate pre-existing degenerative changes. via an elevation in matrix metalloproteinases. Yes, our dear friends, the MMPs, as previously recognized in cartilage, because failure of the structural integrity of the disc can result in annular tears and subsequent disc herniations. The mechanism of crystal formations and the relationship between crystals and disc degeneration merits further investigation. What they have found is that crystals do form inside these discs, and up to 15%, and they do cause a lot of problems. And it's probably something that's actually driving this, the collagen degrading enzymes. It's probably increasing them in that regard, and that's what they've actually noticed. So very interesting. So probably more crystals, increasing MMPs, matrix metalloproteinases, causing further degradation. I'm not claiming that there is some sort of like, cascade effect, but, these oxalate crystals are driving some of these problems. Now here they're looking, this is on an update on oxalate crystal disease, as it's called, which is HyperOxaloare, as it's called. Let me just zoom in a bit more. These are the sort of tissues that usually get affected. So when we're looking at oxalate disorders, arthritis, sort of joints, spinal, different tissue in regards to the sort of areas. Kidney stones are quite popular amongst people that consume quite a lot of these oxalate-rich foods, and I can attest to that. Being a beneficiary of the oxalate, kidney-derived stones. Heart, arrhythmias. Most people wouldn't have considered arrhythmias a potential oxalate issue of their past enjoyment of spinach and many other oxalate-rich foods. Diastolic dysfunction, blood pressure dysfunction, So a number of things related to basically the impaired functioning of the heart. Skin, non-healing ulcers, a number of things like that. And we know, we've heard, like vegans having these sort of issues as well. Could be due to very high oxalates. Some of them do consume quite a lot, including some of the low carbers as well. Let's be honest, I was a low carb, never a vegan, and I consumed quite a lot of these green leafy vegetables, again, because they were considered low carbohydrate, safe foods. Not so safe. In the eye, retinal oxalate deposits create a lot of issues with eye problems. Nerve and muscles, the myelination we're talking about here. So teeth, jawbone, dental mobility and all that sort of stuff. Bone marrow. So even affecting, having a relationship with anemia. More dysfunctions, fractures, pseudo fractures. Yes, we know a lot of the vegan doctors do suffer these. So it's not only their poor diet, but potentially the incorporation of a lot of these. So one, they end up with poor bone for a number of reasons. They're low But to some extent, they're probably also adding quite a bit of, oxalate to their bone structure, which is exacerbating these issues even further. Let me just get rid of table 1. This is of a 23-year-old girl with month-old girl. So we're talking about a child here, not even 1 year old, with end-stage renal failure. Again, probably from the mother consuming too many of these. So you can see the depositions in the bone as well of these crystals. So, if your mum's consuming these sort of foods on a vegan or low carbohydrate diet while she's pregnant, could be an issue. Oxalates, autism, normal urine oxalates. So as you can see, means standard. Look at the differences. Talking about 7 to 7.5 times difference. That is a massive order of magnitude, So when we're looking at odds ratio, remember the sort of odds in which is associational is usually in the order of 1 point something, which is nothing. It's statistical noise. Here, this observational difference is massive, and it's actually measured, unlike epidemiology, which is those odd ratios, or what they call risk ratios, which is a wrong way of calling it. But the associational ratios are quite low. It's only when you're looking at over 10 when you're looking at tobacco. But here we've got autism spectrum urine oxalates. That means we're measuring urine and we're looking at oxalates in kids without autism, kids with a lot of autism. Seems like the plant-based diet really is, problematic. If you're on a plant-based diet. Now, this could be, I'm not claiming here that oxalates are causing autism. No. But this is a strong association, which basically means that if you're on a species inappropriate diet, which a lot of people are nowadays, they're consuming far higher amounts of carbohydrates, far less animal products, and the autism rates are much higher than what they were in the past when people ate more animal foods. We know that animal foods, the saturated fats, the cholesterol, important peptides and important other components in animal foods, taurine as an example, very important for brain development, and a lot of other things that basically are deficient in a vegan diet or a plant-based diet, or basically a kibble diet, a sad diet. A lot of these people are eating highly processed garbage. It sort of explains why, the disease rates are so high in terms of those populations. It does not surprise me. Obviously, if you're eating a lot of this refined garbage, you're also going to have higher oxalates, especially the grains, very high in oxalates. So it is a good association. And when we're looking at Let me just bring this across. You know, that's the mean standard deviation. Whatever you want, I'll go from the mean. Oops. And I'm doing that deliberately to basically go for a lower figure. That's still significant, you know. I mean, when we're looking at something like 3 required to actually generate a hypothesis, here's nearly 6, double that, you know. So it says a lot about the, you know, a plant-based diet when you move away from an ancestral diet that's more heavier in animal foods. Okay, normalization of urinary oxalate by taurine in glycolate-fed rats. Ah, yes, those little rats. So oral feeding of sodium glycolate, 50 milligrams a day, rat for 10 days, caused significant increase in oxalate, taurine excretion, and a decrease in liver. And remember, this is glycolate. Just because they've attached to sodium, sodium isn't the problem. Okay, let's just get that out of your little strange heads, because there is no relation between sodium and it's essential for your blood and all that. So let's just get that. They've just combined it. Okay, we're talking about glycolic acid. Okay, that's what we're talking about. Anyway, taurine excretion, you know, just because you've got something bound, there are things out there that are toxic that have got bound different molecules or different things like sulfurs or methyl groups or whatever, or, you know, carboxyl. That doesn't mean that, you know, it's just the way chemically things are attached or connected or whatever. So just, that's what I mean. Very important to understand these things so you don't confuse, because I know a lot of you people can sometimes jump onto reductionist nonsense. Yes. Anyway, so glycolic acid dehydrogenase levels as compared to normal untreated rats. Taurine, 100 milligrams a day per rat. When administered along with glycolate, prevented these effects of glycolate as evidence from normal urinary excretion of oxalate. Liver protein content, glycolic acid oxidase, and glycolic acid dehydrogenase levels in glycolate plus taurine-fed animals. So, taurine again to the rescue. Doesn't surprise me. We know that basically oxalate, when it comes to sulfur basically binds and, you know, oxalate. Sulfur's really good at doing a lot of that sort of stuff. Anyway, let me just come out of this a bit. I'm not going to go through this study. I'll pin it. People can look at it. Taurine suppresses reactive oxygen species dependent autophagy via activation of mTOR signaling pathway in calcium oxalate crystals, induced renal tubular epithelial cell injury. We're talking about the kidneys again. Okay, so let's just go down here. And a growing number of publications suggest that taurine exerts a protective effect on the pathogenesis of kidney disease. In the present work, we show that taurine treatment attenuated calcium oxalate crystals induced TEC injury, both in vitro and in vivo. So in a petri dish and inside an organism. Taurine, okay, is a sulfur-containing non-protein amino acid that is mainly distributed in kidney, heart, brain. with the regulatory effects on osmotic pressure. What I've talked about, intra and extracellular fluids, cell protection, antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, membrane stability, yes, ion transport. And we know that basically taurine is an important transporter of both ions and also amino acids. Our results show the pre-treatment with taurine enhanced cell viability. Yes, we want cell viability in those kidneys. And ameliorated kidney tissue injury. Yes, we definitely want that. And taurine effectively interrupts ethanol-induced inflammatory cycle and ameliorates kidney damage. Yes, we know. Yes, I know. It's not a license to go and booze and then take more taurine that protects kidneys and liver and all that. Yes, I occasionally haven't been known to do something like that. But, if you do it constantly, it's not going to help that much. Occasionally, yes, but not constantly, you fucking drunks that follow me. Anyway, so pretty much it's another bit of a take on those wonderful oxalate crystals and their damaging effects on bones, in this case on discs and spines and all that. So if you've got these sort of degenerative spinal or disc issues, it's more likely an issue that you have had far too much issues on that. Now there is, let me find the other part. Okay, let me just bring that up because I did forget about this. These are the sort of treatments they talk about. Well, we don't want to, we want to be hydrating with fat, and we don't want to be, because at the end of the day, bile does help, and taurine helps with bile, and that removes a lot of those oxalates as well, helps get rid of the crap, so to speak. So, let's not, I'm not a big fan of excessive water. It is high in deuterium, especially the a lot of the terrestrial water that is at much lower elevations that the majority of us consume. So, keep that in mind. We don't want to deal with one problem with another. But what are the inhibitors? Urinary crystal inhibitors. This is the stuff we need to focus on. Okay? This is supposed to help flush out. Well, let's be honest. If you've basically inhibiting, you probably won't get a lot of this sort of stuff in your system. You won't have to flush as much. The key thing is citrate. I've talked about it. Lemon juice, I've talked about using that, or using things like, citric acid, getting a food grade. There is a brand that I've actually used in the past, which is a food grade citric acid, which is on iHerb. There's probably other companies that sell at different prices, maybe even better prices. So shop around in that regard. Phosphorus, yes. What are the high phosphorus foods? I wonder. Oh, those pesky animal foods like meat. It sort of explains why a carnivore diet can improve the inhibition of oxalates, why people get a lot of relief and improvements. Magnesium. Well, magnesium is more associated, when I've looked at studies, than basically, yes, it plays a role, but it's probably overrated. Phosphorus is much more important. Taurine, citrate, these sort of things. Calcium supplements with meals, I would not recommend. Just eat more calcium-rich foods and have a good vitamin D status, and that will help along those lines. A low oxalate diet, obviously, this low fat crap is what got us into the first place. If you're on a low oxalate diet, what are you going to, there's not much to eat, okay? You're either eating meat or you're eating plants, which most of them have quite a bit of oxalate. And the rest of them are basically a lot of fruit that are low oxalate. Not all fruit, but most of them. But the problem is there, we're talking about fruitarian, and you'll degenerate and waste away. So that's not a solution. We know this sort of low fat nonsense is nonsense. At the end of the day, it's the Randall cycle. And the best diet to ameliorate the Randall cycle is the carnivore diet or any other low carb diet that doesn't have a lot of friggin' oxalate, green leafy shit. Pretty much. Oh, yes. Being a medical journal, what would they actually also recommend? Kidney transplants as the final solution. I don't think we have to go that far, as long as we can get some of this animal foods high in phosphorus, citrate, yes, and animal foods will give you more than enough magnesium. I think and also dairy products. We don't need supplements. Dairy products are just good enough. And there's a secondary and possible effects and possible, things. Obviously, I would say that is a primary one, of this part. That is ridiculous, but definitely get the shit out of the diet, and basically use animal-based products to basically eliminate that with some supplemental citric acid or lemon juice. Yes. So I hope people have understood a bit about these related problems with oxalates and some of the approaches that can be used if people do have disc issues, spinal issues, and some of this degeneration isn't resolving. They've tried the carnivore diet, they've tried to increase, they've used collagen supplements and all that. Remember, collagen supplements can also, in combination with vitamin C, can also increase the amount of oxalate as well. So you've got to be very careful when you're playing with fire. Eat animal foods, the flesh of animals, not supplements. Okay, guys? We need to avoid supplements. We need to eat animal foods. And also pump up the sulfur part, which is MSM, because we don't want to basically overtax taurine. So add MSM into there as well, because we get a lot of depletion, unfortunately, otherwise. So that's the sort of, some general approaches if you've got these sort of ailments. But it also, any related oxalate toxicity that people may have beyond just the spine and discs, these approaches will help. So I hope this has given some insight in people that have approached me and about spinal issues and disc issues and disc degeneration. That this may be another issue that they may have not been aware of, and now that they're aware of, they've got some strategies to deal with this. This is not medical advice. Let me remind you, you should always take this information to your doctor and discuss the issue. But in my personal opinion, looking at some of the research and all that, and knowing that these substances have a positive effect in ameliorating this problem and reducing these crystals in our bodies, it does take time. My personal opinion is that there probably is a 7-year turnover of all cells in the body, and it's probably going to take probably a decade to clear a lot of this damage out. It's not going to be a quick effect for a number of people. Some people may respond better, earlier, depending on how much damage they've had. What's your diet been in the past? Has it been heavy in these high oxalate foods or lighter? So there are going to be quite a few differences. All I can say is that increase your animal-based foods, citric acid, phosphorus-rich foods like meat, and based on past research that I've talked about, how salt, phosphorus, and protein are three key components that play a big role in the improvements of bone and bone health. And if you're low on these, bone production goes down, and so does muscle. So it's quite clearly related, and this was a clinical study that I've talked about in the past. So, you need to focus on a more species appropriate diet and some of these strategies with taurine citrate to sort of help along as you're slowly healing and slowly starting to dissolve this crap inside our bodies. You'll probably need more sulfur than other people if you've got these sort of conditions. The other important is that keratin, or these sort of collagen sort of binders that bind a lot of the collagen proteins, is also in sulfur amino acids, play an important thing. So keratin, you're looking at both MSM and taurine. Those sort of sulfurs help a lot. So combining those with an oxalate cleansing type approach of citric acid and stuff like that is going to help along the way. It's not going to be a quick solution. It will take time, but in the long run, you'll be better off for it, and your health span will be improved. Anyway, that's about it. Hope you enjoyed it. See yous.